What was popular music pre-1950? What are the foundations that led us to rock music? Early American popular music first consists of tunes that are brought to the American colonies by the British and other European nations. Before the 20th century, most popular music was very simple in nature. This is due to no um, recording technology today. Most of these popular tunes had to be passed along as sheet music or for the amateur performance market. During the mid 1800s, several different forms began to take hold. We get band music, the blues, Tin Pan Alley are four of these examples. It really is recorded technology that begins to change everything with the modern music era. Pictured here, we have the Edison cylinder, named after Thomas Edison. And it isn't until the 1880s that this invention becomes available to the masses and gives us recorded music. Before then, music is distributed by live music. Of course, you consume it live, but it's distributed on sheet music. So here are a couple pop, pre-rock, pre-1950 trends in America. These are more of the turn of the 20th century. Um, of course, before then you have like the British drinking songs, tavern tunes. Our national anthem in the United States was based off of one of these tunes. You also have the importance of the Black American spiritual um, and church music and those trends that lead us to minstrelsy and other forms. But by the end of um, the 1800s, ragtime, Tin Pan Alley, and then early 20th century Dixieland jazz. There's other forms of jazz that are early as well, but and swing dance band, the big bands, and the blues are of the biggest importance leading us to rock. Ragtime is a popular African American piano music from the middle part of the late 19th century. Pianists would take popular melodies of the day and then rag them, or other words, speed them up and add syncopations. Um, and this idea of the syncopation, that's inherent from African music that was brought over um, by the enslaved Black American peoples. Um, that's part of heavily in West African traditions is syncopation. Scott Joplin in 1868 to 1917 is the self-proclaimed king of ragtime and jazz. Is an important composer and performer of note. Take a listen to Maple Leaf Rag. I've got it linked in this PowerPoint, and it's also in the Blackboard course shell. Here's Scott Joplin, and this is some of his self-promotion. There at the top left, you have the entertainer, and this is the front of a piece of sheet music. A little bit later on, you get, of course, records and before then the Edison cylinder, and the player piano roll is another way it's preserved. Tin Pan Alley, named for the bright, tinny tone of cheap pianos used by composers and the publishing companies in New York between 28th and 5th Avenue on Broadway. And it was so tinny and bright sounding, you could hear piano to piano. And these fire escapes that connected the buildings, actually, composers would walk out on them between each building. There's a picture of that at the top. Missing the fire escapes, but that's some of Tin Pan Alley, and those music publishers just stacked on top of each other. They wrote music for vaudeville shows, for minstrelsy, the precursor of the Broadway musical. Most of these songs were popular dance rhythms, sounds of the gay 19th, meaning the 1890s, happy and upbeat, models for later rock tunes. Take Me Out to the Ball Game is an example of that. And I've got that link there in the slide, plus it's on the Blackboard shell. Much of this music was also published to sell for the amateur home market. The thing you have to remember about the 1800s is as times were improving for a lot of folks, one of the things that people would want to own in their home was a piano. So piano performance and home music making was the way entertainment happened. You didn't have yet the radio or the Edison cylinder really in homes so much in the 18, especially middle 1800s on the Industrial Revolution and so forth. But here we've got pictured on the far right a bit about some composers working together. It's usually teams of songwriters, of a lyricist, and a composer working together. Lyricist writes the words, composer writes the music. And down there, the historic landmark on Tin Pan Alley. Please take a watch at that video on Tin Pan Alley on the court shell. With jazz, one of our first important trends is Dixieland jazz, which originates in New Orleans, and it comes about from various band music and blending of European traditions with popular African American traditions. Parades, concerts, funerals, they all use bands. There are tons of bands in New Orleans. And it's that New Orleans being a cultural melting point. It was possessed by the French at one point, by the Spanish, and by North America as the major port in the unfortunate story of slavery, where African Americans were brought to the U.S. We've got the Creole culture, the white European, all mixing together to give us early Dixieland jazz. These small groups are mainly based out of African American and Creole musicians who played European instruments. Most of them can mainly read music. So they add the improvised lines and syncopation of the music, and this gets us to the style of Dixieland jazz. Improvisation is key, and improvisation goes back to African traditions, but there's also a bit of improvisation in European Western music. The concertos of Beethoven, sonatas of Mozart, and so forth, and works by Paganini and the violin. Many of them had improvised sections at one point that have just kind of gone by the wayside. That it become more through composed, but improvisation remains a key element of jazz. We also get the syncopated line of gospel music. Bands are made up of small groups of musicians. We get this front line of trumpet, or cornet at the time, trombone, clarinet, sax, or saxophone. Usually three instruments: a cornet, a trombone, and a clarinet. Rhythm section being banjo or guitar, string bass, and tuba. Sometimes you'd have the piano instead of the guitar with the drums. So you get the rhythm section with the front line of three horns in Dixieland. Collective improvisation is part of the tradition as well. So improvisation, syncopating, swinging rhythms are key elements of jazz. Jazz is considered by many scholars to be a uniquely American art music. So it has its heyday of being a popular music of the young and commercially hugely viable during the Dixieland and swing era. Then it moves on to more of an art music that is still living and breathing today, but isn't at the pinnacle of commercial selling success. During the Dixieland period, this was the heyday of this type of music. So comes out of New Orleans, recorded in Chicago initially. We've got Louis Armstrong, superstar up there of Dixieland jazz music. Below that is a picture of Louis Armstrong in his mentor's band, King Oliver. King Oliver is sitting there, and the young Louis Armstrong is there in the photo next to his then wife, Lil Hardin, the pianist of the band. There's an example of a modern Dixieland band to the right, and then there at the top is Louis Armstrong and King Oliver. So the next big trend in popular music in the U.S., the swing bands, the big bands. So instead of the small improvised combo, we've got a bigger group of 4 trombones, 4 trumpets, 5 saxophones, replacing that smaller front horn unit of 3 with a rhythm section of piano, bass, and drums. So you have to have an arranger to set the music, and it's improvised solos become shorter and less important, but they're still there. It's still a swung style. The median is mainly there for dancing, and this is the biggest popularity of big band swing music is through the 1930s through about around 1945, the end of World War II. And carrying on, these groups often feature singers, and a new singing style is developed, this crooning style. And we've got Bing Crosby and Perry Como being big examples of that. Frank Sinatra and Tommy Dorsey crooning there. And there is some pictures of big bands. We've got racially separated at this time. We've got like the Count Basie Orchestra at the top on the left. On the right, the great Duke Ellington, one of our greatest American composers of any genre, a brilliant person in American music. Then we've got Benny Goodman, who was one of the first commercially successful bands to integrate on some level his band of using black and white musicians. The white musicians and the black bands had two different styles of playing, and over time they've become more blended, more homogenized, especially as integration becomes more of a thing in the mid-20th century after you move past the swing era. In the middle, you've got Tommy Dorsey with his featured singer the young Frank Sinatra, and then to the bottom there is the Stan Kenton Orchestra. Next, happening kind of simultaneously, a bit before and a bit after the swing era, is the blues, and this one is key to the story of rock and roll. It's also a foundational music. Looking at its roots that led to jazz. It's still popular to this day. The roots go back to Arabia, Spain, and the Middle East, along with Africa, and it's very similar to their traditional musics in those nations. Use of call and response, where you have a leader sings the melody, an idea, and then a group sings back. This is used in the blues, used in jazz, and it comes directly from black gospel music. The work song of the African American slaves, the field holler, another form of work songs, usually a lament or sad song. The early form of blues proper is country blues or the rural blues. The text is rough and emotional, usually a singer and guitar player. Delta blues of the Mississippi Delta is a big direct influence to rock music. Very expressive lyrics. Singers have a rough tone, and it's very much region dependent. Robert Johnson, Charlie Payton's Son House are big things in the story of Delta blues. Strum guitar with vocals. Bottleneck is popular, slid up and down the neck of the guitar. And I'll slide to a picture here. The bottleneck is in the bottom right-hand corner. It's honestly a beer bottle that's cut off or filed off and smoothed to where the player won't cut themselves, and you get that sliding sound. Let me slide back to our slide here. Key features of the blues sound. We've got big, well-known guitarists that come on a little bit later. Lead Belly, Big Joe Williams, and Muddy Waters. It's a sorrowful, expressive tone that comes from the struggles of the African American people, who up until recently, as this music's being developed, were enslaved and still marginalized as a poor group from the rural South. The blue note comes about. It's the fifth note in a pentatonic scale, and it's very dominant in Islamic and African music. They add a note in between the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth and the pentatonic scale, and that becomes the blue note. That's the sixth pitch, saying that more correctly. Blues form is very important. We're going to get into this a bit later, but it's steady 4/4, 12 bars is too many statements, followed by an answer. It's basically an AAB form of 4 bars followed by the next 4-bar statement and the final 4-bar statement that takes you back to the beginning. And each one of these 12-bar units has a different verse on it. So I have more explanation on that on a future slide presentation and module. You get a swung rhythmic feeling in the blues as well, and it's just kind of a swaying element. Here's some great blues musicians. You got B.B. King on the right with his guitar Lucille. He's a bit later form of blues. Muddy Waters on the left, and down there is Billie Holiday. Robert Johnson is the Mississippi blues musician of note. It's not that there weren't others, but he is the central figure. Dies relatively unknown, young, at age 28. Records 29 songs in makeshift studios and hotel rooms mainly. And distribution is limited due to racism during his lifetime. But man, is he influential to everybody that comes after him. This Crossroad Blues has been covered by so many later rock, rhythm and blues musicians. And we're going to come back to it several times. So listen to Crossroad Blues in Robert Johnson's version. And there's a bit of a Faustian legend of the selling your soul to the devil to become a great musician, because there's stories about him being not a very strong or inspiring musician. Then he goes away and practices and works on his craft heavily. In a relatively short time, becomes one of the masters, and then records a few influential things and dies young, relatively unknown. So the Crossroad actually refers to two different spots in, an unmarked road crossing in Mississippi rural area in the early 20th century, where you don't even have the roads labeled by names. And it's at this crossroad that Robert Johnson legendarily meets the devil and sells his soul to become like a great musician. Bessie Smith, 1894 to 1937, known as the Empress of the Blues, is the biggest blues star of the period of which blues music is popular, most popular in the U.S. And it is during this period of extreme racism and sexism that it is the black American female blues singers who are the biggest stars in the genre. Just made really, really good money doing great music and highly influential. Her vocal style is foundational to just about any rock and roll singer that comes after, especially folks like Janis Joplin, um, Robert Plant, and Led Zeppelin, and just every heavy blues rock musician especially in the late 60s, early and mid 70s. Transitions to early rock and roll. This, you can oversimplify it, but the biggest trends are the blues, jazz, swing, and concert band and tin pan alley music. Principally, the blues is probably the most important that leads us to early rock around 1950. And it is the changing landscape of technology that also leads us to popularizing rock. The 78 recording, the airwaves of AM radio, eventually the long LP and so forth that push it further.